The wind shifted that morning, carrying with it the scent of burning pine. A thick haze rolled over the Appalachian ridgeline, blanketing the sky in a strange orange gloom. It was mid-September, and a sudden wildfire had erupted overnight deep in the Smoky Mountains. Park rangers scrambled to assess the damage, but they had no idea the fire would reveal something buried far deeper than fallen branches and charred earth. It would reignite a mystery that had haunted the town of Townsend, Tennessee, for nearly 2 decades. A mystery about 3 girls, 3 best friends, and one hiking trip that should have been their last adventure before college, but became something else entirely. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below. And if you love gripping stories based on real unsolved cases, subscribe to our channel and help us reach our goal of 1,000 likes on this video. Your support helps us bring these forgotten stories to light. It was July 2007 when the town last saw them. Hannah King, 17, was the quiet one. Bookish, curious, with a camera always hanging around her neck. Maya Jordan, 18, was a natural leader with a bold laugh and an obsession with mountain lore. And then there was Taylor Cross, also 17, fiercely protective of her friends and known for pushing boundaries. They had been inseparable since middle school, calling themselves the Hill Sisters, even though none of them were actually related. That summer, they planned one final overnight hike before heading their separate ways: college, jobs, life. They chose a lesser-known trail near Clingman's Dome, one that Maya had found in an old hiker's blog. The trail was rugged, unmarked in places, and known for being almost too quiet. But to them, that was the appeal. They left on July 15, 2007, with fully loaded backpacks, a disposable camera, and handwritten notes left with their parents detailing the trailhead and expected return date. No one worried. These girls had camped before. They were smart, well-prepared, and overly cautious. When they didn't return the next evening, their families assumed they had extended the trip. But by day 3, phones went unanswered. A search began. A frantic, desperate, breathless search that turned into something else entirely. Volunteers came from 3 counties. Helicopters scanned the canopy, rangers combed through hollows, creek beds, and rocky overpasses. For 11 days, they searched every corner of the trail network, but they found nothing. No tent, no boot print, no broken branch, not even trash. It was as if the mountains had swallowed them whole. Over the years, dozens of theories emerged. A bear attack, a fall off a cliff, a stranger in the woods. Some said the girls had planned it, faked their disappearance to escape their lives, but the families knew better. These girls didn't just walk away. Something happened in those woods, something no one could explain, and then the trail went cold. Police closed the active case in 2010. The story faded from national news. Their faces slowly disappeared from missing person flyers. Time moved on, but the families never did. Then 18 years later, a single ember changed everything. As firefighters battled a fast-moving blaze near the Deep Creek section of the Smokies, one of them noticed something odd among the roots of a scorched sycamore tree. It looked like metal. He brushed away the ash, revealing the warped remains of a rusted lunchbox. Inside, wrapped in melted plastic, was a damp bundle of paper. A faded school logo, a photograph, and 3 names, written in the familiar loops of a teenage hand. Hannah, Maya, Taylor. It was the beginning of a long-buried truth finally clawing its way to the surface. The morning of June 17, 2007, began like any other in the Smoky Mountains. Quiet, misty, and filled with the hum of cicadas and the chirping of distant birds. The air was warm and sticky, the kind that clung to your skin, and the trails had that earthy smell of moss and damp pine. The girls, Ashley Monroe, Lena Watts, and Maribel Cruz, had left their cabin just after 8 a.m. With their backpacks, trail mix, a map, and disposable cameras, they were supposed to hike the Little Duck Hawk Trail, a moderately challenging path that looped back to their cabin by mid-afternoon. Ashley's mother even snapped a quick photo of the three of them laughing and holding their water bottles on the porch before they left, a photo that would later be plastered across missing posters for years. The girls signed the trail log, just as park guidelines instructed, and then disappeared into the forest. By all accounts, the day should have been uneventful, but around 3:00 p.m., heavy clouds rolled in from the east, and the forecasted slight chance of storms turned into a full-blown torrential downpour. Rangers would later report that several trails had experienced flash flooding and fallen branches. The girls were expected back by 5 p.m. When they hadn't returned by 6:30, Ashley's father and uncle went out to look for them, expecting maybe a twisted ankle or a wrong turn. By nightfall, panic had already started to set in. When the girls hadn't returned by 8 p.m., the family contacted park rangers. The first few hours of the search were tense but hopeful. Rangers covered the first mile of trail in both directions, assuming they'd find 3 soaked but embarrassed teenagers. But nothing turned up. Not a sound, not a footprint, not even candy wrappers. The logbook confirmed they had signed in, but there was no return entry. The girls had vanished. The following morning, a full-scale search was launched with over 70 people, rangers, volunteers, dogs, and even helicopters. Local news picked up the story immediately, broadcasting the parents' tearful pleas on television. The search grid expanded to cover nearby ridges and off-trail areas. But after 4 days, not a single clue had emerged. No shoes, no clothing, no dropped camera, no cell phone pings. The terrain made things worse. Dense underbrush, sudden drops, caves and ravines that could easily conceal someone forever. At one point, searchers believed they had found a scrap of fabric that matched Lena's jacket, but it turned out to be a piece of an old tarp buried in mud. Rumors started to swirl. Some said the girls ran away, others speculated about a predator hiding in the woods, someone who knew the terrain better than search teams ever could. A few claimed they'd heard distant cries in the woods, but every lead fizzled out. As the days passed, so did the attention. By the 2-week mark, national media moved on, and even local coverage slowed to a crawl. Flyers slowly peeled off from grocery store windows. Candlelight vigils were held, pastors prayed, and the community mourned, but no closure ever came. The case was officially declared cold just 10 months later, and the families were left with only fading photos and unanswered questions. But deep in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, the truth was still waiting, buried beneath roots and soil, hidden in silence, and preserved by the forest's unyielding grip on secrets. The official search effort lasted 23 days. Helicopters scoured the skies from dawn to dusk, their rotors thundering across the valleys, rattling leaves and stirring up hope. Dozens of trained dogs were brought in, their noses to the ground, darting between trails and rocky outcrops. Hundreds of volunteers combed the dense forest, shouting the girls' names with growing desperation. Maps were drawn and redrawn. Every known trail, stream and shelter within a 10-mile radius of the group's last known location was examined, some areas multiple times. Yet there wasn't a single clue. No dropped flashlight, no torn piece of clothing, not even a candy wrapper. The girls had vanished as if the mountain had swallowed them whole. On day 17, a forest ranger named Carla Denning paused near a stream bend. She'd hiked the area for over 20 years and knew it well. Something didn't feel right. She stood there, listening. The wind rustled the trees gently, birds chirped, but something was missing. The usual feeling of life. The energy was off, as if nature itself was holding its breath. That night, she noted it in her journal. Area around Mason's Hollow gives me the chills, strange quiet, no wildlife sounds, trusting my gut, need to return. But she wasn't given that chance. The search was scaled down by week 4. The command center was packed up, the posters faded in the sun, and the volunteers, many of them locals, slowly went home, hollowed out by the unanswered questions. Officially, the three girls were declared missing, presumed dead. But in the hearts of their families, that phrase was unbearable. Tara's mother refused to take down her daughter's high school graduation picture. She would dust the frame each morning like a ritual, whispering to it, "We're not done yet." Gillian's father became obsessed with topographic maps and survival manuals. He taught himself to read animal tracks and started hiking in the same area every weekend. Rachel's brother left college and created a website dedicated to the case, uploading every rumor, every sighting, every theory, anything that could mean something. Most investigators agreed that the girls had likely taken a wrong turn and succumbed to exposure or injury. But one ranger, Carla Denning, remained unconvinced. She quietly returned to the area several times over the years on her own time, hiking Mason's Hollow and the surrounding ridges. She never found anything concrete, but her gut still told her there was something unnatural about the area. She started noticing local rumors, old stories passed between hikers and hunters, people who said that part of the forest felt wrong. Some said compasses acted strange there. Others spoke of strange lights at night or distant sounds that didn't match any known wildlife. Of course, these stories were easy to dismiss as campfire folklore. But Carla took notes. Her final journal entry before her retirement read, "If they are out there, if anything remains, Mason's Hollow is still the place to watch. Something lingers there. Don't let it fade." By 2010, the case had gone cold. No new leads, no breakthroughs. The girls' families, once connected by shared grief, had drifted apart. New hikers walked those trails, unaware of the sorrow etched into the soil beneath their boots. The Smoky Mountains moved on. The trees grew taller. The memories faded. But deep in the woods, untouched and undisturbed, something waited. Buried under years of fallen leaves, moss, and silence, a secret remained. And it would take a catastrophe to bring it back into the light. In early August of 2023, nearly 2 decades after the girls vanished, a severe heat wave swept across the southeast. Temperatures in Tennessee soared, and the forests of the Smoky Mountains, lush, green, and seemingly eternal, grew dry and brittle. On the morning of August 12th, lightning struck a ridge near Mason's Hollow. The spark ignited a wildfire. It started small, but within hours, flames surged across the dry underbrush, climbing trees and jumping ridges. The fire moved fast, faster than many had seen in that region before. Park officials evacuated nearby campgrounds and closed off several access points. Helicopters dumped water, ground crews dug fire lines, and rangers worked through the night to contain the blaze. By the second day, the fire had consumed nearly 2,000 acres. On day 3, it reached a remote area rarely touched by visitors or staff, the northern slope of Mason's Hollow. It was here that the forest finally surrendered its secret. A ranger named Miguel Soriano, assigned to monitor hotspots after the main fire had been subdued, noticed something unusual. Amid the scorched landscape and smoldering ash, a patch of disturbed earth stood out, lighter in color, softer in texture. It was an area protected by a rocky overhang that had shielded it from the worst of the flames. Miguel knelt and brushed away loose debris. Beneath the surface, he found something no one expected, a cracked metal bracelet. It was simple, worn and charred, but the engraving inside was still visible. TJ, love always, Mom. His hands froze. The initials matched Tara Jensen. Immediately, authorities were alerted and a forensic team was flown in. The area was cordoned off. Over the next 3 days, the team uncovered what had remained hidden for 18 years. Partial human remains, clothing fragments, a shattered disposable camera, a melted flashlight. And then, perhaps most hauntingly, a ring of stones arranged in a circle like a primitive fire pit, with bones placed intentionally inside. The bones were later confirmed to belong to two of the missing girls. Dental records matched. The third set of remains was never found, but the scene raised more questions than it answered. Why were the remains buried there? Who created the fire pit? Why were two bodies together but the third missing? And why did no one find this place sooner? The area was just beyond the last edge of the original search perimeter, less than a mile from where volunteers had stopped searching in 2005. One more mile, and everything might have been discovered nearly 2 decades earlier. The discovery reignited national interest in the case. News stations ran retrospectives. The website Rachel's brother had created received a surge in traffic. People began to speculate again. Theories bloomed, wild ones and plausible ones. Some said the girls had been stalked, others believed they had gotten lost, and one had tried to bury the others after a tragic fall. But then there was the fire pit. Its presence hinted at something ritualistic or purposeful. It didn't feel random. Forensic anthropologists determined the bones had been broken post-mortem, but by what or whom they couldn't say. The remains showed no signs of blunt trauma or animal predation, no bullet wounds, no knife marks. It was as if they had simply stopped living. One detective privately told a journalist, "It's like they sat down and never got back up." But the bracelet, that was real, that was human. And it had been placed on top of the soil, not buried. As if someone wanted it to be found, now and not before. It was the first breadcrumb in a trail that had been hidden for years, and it was only the beginning. Because 5 days later, after the smoke had cleared, a firefighter made another discovery, one that would change everything they thought they knew about what happened in those woods. The fire had exposed more than just bones. 5 days after the initial discovery, as containment crews scouted for lingering embers on the far edge of Mason's Hollow, a firefighter named Bethany Crane radioed in an unusual sighting. Nestled between two blackened tree stumps was a warped metallic object half buried in the ash. She knelt to examine it and realized it was a heavily corroded camping stove, partially melted and clearly aged. But it wasn't the stove itself that caught her attention. It was the scorched remnants of a canvas backpack nearby, just barely visible under a layer of soot. Inside the backpack, Bethany found a plastic Ziploc bag, sealed, intact, and miraculously protected from the heat. It contained photographs, dozens of them. They were time-stamped, faded, and some were water-damaged, but still legible. The first few were harmless, smiling faces of the girls on the trail, posing near a waterfall, laughing at a picnic spot. But then they changed. The next series showed the girls inside a makeshift wooden structure, one that didn't appear on any ranger maps or GPS surveys. The lighting in the photos was dim, the angles strange, as if taken secretly or without consent. In one image, Rachel sat alone, her eyes wide, not smiling. In another, Tara appeared to be reaching for something outside the frame. The final photo in the sequence showed only trees, but in the far corner of the image, barely visible, was what looked like the silhouette of a man. Not one of the girls. Not anyone ever reported missing, just standing there, watching. Forensic experts analyzed the photos, especially the last one. They enhanced the image, adjusted for shadow and contrast. The figure appeared to be wearing old-fashioned hiking gear, boots, a canvas vest, and a broad hat. But his face was obscured by shadow, and no identification was possible. Rumors erupted online. Had someone been living in the forest all those years? A survivalist, a predator, a ghost? One theory gained traction, that the girls had stumbled upon something or someone they were never meant to find. Park officials admitted reluctantly that there were areas of the Smokies so remote, so difficult to reach, that it was possible someone could have lived undetected for decades, and it wouldn't be the first time. In the 1980s, a man known as the North Pond Hermit had survived alone in Maine for 27 years without being discovered. Could the Smokies have harbored a similar recluse, one far more sinister? The wooden structure in the photos became the focus. But despite intense searching, no such building was ever found. Some believed the fire had destroyed it. Others thought it had never been real, an illusion caused by shadows and panic. But one ranger, Jake Hollowell, wasn't convinced. He had worked the original case in 2005. He remembered the girl's route, the witness reports, the psychic tip-offs. And one detail always stuck with him, an unverified account from an old hiker who claimed to have seen a cabin off the ridge that wasn't there the week before. At the time, no one believed him. Now, Jake wasn't so sure. He requested access to the newly discovered evidence and began cross-referencing the map's hand-drawn circles with old forestry records and satellite images. One circle in particular matched a clearing that hadn't appeared on any recent maps, but did show up in a satellite photo from 2004. That clearing was no longer visible, either overgrown or deliberately erased. Jake set out to find it himself, with only one other ranger for backup. They left at dawn. By dusk, only one of them would return, with footage that would make national headlines. Jake Hollowell returned just after nightfall, dirty, shaken, and strangely silent. The other ranger, Corey Landon, was nowhere to be seen. When Jake stumbled into the ranger outpost, his clothes torn and face bloodied by branches, he was gripping a handheld camera like a lifeline. He handed it over without a word, collapsed into a chair, and muttered just one sentence: "It's not gone." The footage was grainy, jittery, but it told a story that chilled the room into stillness. Jake and Corey had hiked beyond the main trails, following the hand-drawn circles from the map, eventually cutting through dense underbrush to reach the clearing. What they found wasn't just a ruin. It was a partially buried cabin, charred, but still intact. Blackened logs jutted from the soil like ribs, and a single door stood crookedly open. Inside, the camera captured something unexpected: walls lined with scribbled notes, faded Polaroids, and symbols carved into the wood. One photo was of the three girls, Rachel, Tara, and Lily, smiling, but it wasn't one of the known photos from their trip. This one had never been seen before. It had been taken from inside the cabin, a view through a narrow wooden window. They were being watched. The camera panned slowly across the room. A table was nailed to the floor, chains bolted to its legs. Beneath it, what appeared to be human fingernails, old and broken, scattered across the dirt floor. Then the video shook violently. Jake's voice could be heard shouting Corey's name, followed by heavy breathing and snapping branches. The footage ended abruptly as the screen went black. No further recording. Corey never made it back. A massive new search began that same night, but no trace of him was found, not even his flashlight or radio. The park was immediately closed to the public. Helicopters returned, dogs were brought in, and drones scoured the forest canopy. Nothing. Jake was hospitalized with severe dehydration, minor lacerations, and psychological shock. When questioned, his answers were fragmented. He claimed they had been followed for hours. He said he heard whispering, though no one else was around. He insisted that the cabin moved. Investigators dismissed that last part as trauma-induced delusion, but others, especially those familiar with the legend of the Walker, weren't so quick to laugh. The Walker, according to local Cherokee law, was a spirit tied to the land, a silent figure said to appear only to those who trespassed in sacred spaces. He didn't speak. He didn't chase. He simply watched. Some believed he was a metaphor. Others were certain he was real, and now, with Corey gone and the footage in hand, the legend was back in full force. Paranormal investigators reached out. National news picked up the story. The term Smoky Mountains Shadow Man began trending online. But for the families of Rachel, Tara, and Lily, none of that mattered. They wanted answers. And Jake, recovering in silence, was the only person alive who had been close enough to glimpse the truth. Weeks passed. No new evidence emerged. Then, one morning, a park maintenance crew clearing debris from a remote logging path discovered something grotesque. A boot, half buried in the mud, with a human foot still inside. Forensics confirmed it belonged to Corey Landon. The cut was clean, surgical. No animal had done this. The boot had been placed, not discarded. A message, someone or something was watching the search teams, and it wanted them to stop. But they didn't, because now the mystery was no longer about three girls lost in the forest. It was about a predator who might still be out there, one who knew how to hide in the trees, and who had just made it very clear. He wasn't finished. The autopsy on Corey Landon's severed foot yielded unsettling results. No signs of decomposition. The foot had been severed post-mortem, but recently, within the last 72 hours. That meant Corey had been alive for nearly 3 weeks after his disappearance. Somehow, somewhere, he had been kept. And then, just like that, part of him was returned. The forest, it seemed, had given back only what it wanted. The FBI took over. The park remained officially closed to the public, but helicopters still buzzed overhead, and unmarked vans came and went without explanation. A mobile command center was set up near the old fire tower. The mood was tense, not just among the officials, but among the locals too. Rumors flew about satanic cults, rogue survivalists, and ghost stories resurrected from childhood whispers. But the investigators weren't chasing legends. They were analyzing the cabin's contents, especially the photographs. A dozen Polaroids had been recovered from the ruins, all water-damaged but partially intact. Each showed a different angle of the forest, but the subjects were consistent. Teenage girls, always photographed from a distance, through brush, behind trees, sometimes while bending to tie a boot or drink from a canteen. Most disturbing of all, some of the girls weren't Rachel, Tara, or Lily. The timestamps, faint but legible, dated back decades, some as early as 1992. The implication was clear. Whoever had built the cabin had been there a long time, watching, hunting, and the forest had swallowed more than anyone knew. One of the images showed a young woman standing near a wooden marker, a primitive cross with initials carved into it. CM. The initials didn't match any of the 3 known victims, nor anyone else officially missing. But when the image was circulated online, a tip came in. A retired hiker living in Asheville said he'd seen the same initials carved into a tree near a trail that had been closed since 2005. That tip led rangers to a forgotten trailhead overgrown with moss and thick underbrush. About a mile in, they found something. 7 more wooden markers, each crudely built, each with a different set of initials. And behind the last one, embedded in a moss-covered boulder, was a rusted metal door. It looked like something from a Cold War bunker, bolted shut, hidden from the world. It took hours to force it open. What they found inside would fracture everyone who entered. The air was heavy with mold and old decay. A narrow staircase led down into the darkness, opening into a chamber no larger than a storage room. Along one wall, shelves held jars. Inside each, items suspended in fluid. Shoes, scraps of fabric, a pair of cracked glasses, teeth, personal effects, souvenirs. A small desk sat in the corner. On it, a journal, handwritten, dozens of entries, no name, no dates, just thoughts. Scattered, broken, often repeating the same phrases. The forest is mine. They don't belong here. I see them before they see me. The girls screamed the same. One entry read, October 11th, the brunette cried the most, hid in the trees. I waited. She came down when she got cold. October 11th. That was the day after Rachel, Tara, and Lily had disappeared. This was the predator's lair, a place of obsession, a tomb of trophies. The journal gave no location, no confession of murder, but it told a story of someone who believed he was the guardian of the forest, and the forest had to be kept clean. Investigators sealed the site immediately, but the damage was done. News spread fast. The Smoky Mountains weren't just haunted, they'd been home to a serial predator for decades. The public demanded answers, but none came. No suspect, no identity, no trace of the person who'd written the journal. And yet, even with everything they'd found, none of the girls' bodies were recovered. The fire had unearthed secrets, but not the truth. Not yet. As investigators combed through the bunker, the pressure from media and local residents intensified. National networks ran the story non-stop. The Smoky Mountains stalker, the forest collector, America's forgotten predator. Yet despite the chilling discoveries, there was one glaring problem. No physical remains, no bones, no DNA confirmation of what had happened to Rachel, Tara, and Lily. The families, though shaken, still clung to hope. After all, if Corey Landon had survived for 3 weeks, could the girls have been kept alive even longer? And if so, where were they now? The journal, though horrifying, was not a confession. It was fragmented, like the mind behind it. One entry in particular drew attention. The map is not for them. It's mine, my paths, my eyes, my silence. That line, my eyes, disturbed agents. It implied surveillance, perhaps even live monitoring of trails. The idea wasn't far-fetched. Some trail cams had gone missing during earlier searches. With renewed urgency, the FBI launched a hidden camera sweep of the park. Within 72 hours, they found 2 makeshift surveillance posts camouflaged into rock faces and trees. Inside were cameras, non-standard hacked-together devices using weatherproof casings and solar panels. But they weren't powered anymore. Batteries corroded, memory cards gone. Except one. One device had a card still inside, untouched. They rushed it to the lab. What it contained would send agents reeling. Hundreds of video clips, silent, grainy, handheld. Some filmed through brush, others from elevated positions. In several, a figure could be seen moving, always at a distance, always just behind. The footage followed hikers, couples, and teens, capturing them from trailhead to campsite, sometimes for hours. Then, one clip froze everyone in the room. It was dated October 10, 2007, the day the girls vanished. The camera focused on 3 young women hiking along the ridge trail. Rachel in front, Tara in the middle, Lily lagging behind, looking over her shoulder. The camera moved when she did. It followed them until twilight. The final clip ended with static as they entered a thicket off-trail, likely the very path that led to their disappearance. There was no violence shown, no attacker, just surveillance. It confirmed what many feared. They had been watched, hunted, but it also posed a terrifying question. Who was holding the camera? And where was he now? A behavioral profiler brought in from Quantico studied the journal and footage. His theory: the suspect was likely ex-military or former Forest Service. Someone with survivalist training. Someone who knew the terrain intimately, who could navigate blindfolded, build traps, go unseen. A ghost with a camera. In a chilling twist, a former park ranger named Everett Grange surfaced as a person of interest. He had worked in the park from 1991 to 2006, retiring just months before the girls vanished. Records showed he lived alone on the outskirts of the county, in a secluded cabin nearly 12 miles from the nearest road. When agents arrived at his home, it was empty, clean, too clean, as if someone had wiped it of life. No mail, no trash, no fingerprints, but hidden under a loose floorboard, they found a rusted hunting knife and a map of the Smokies. Not a regular map. This one was marked with red dots, dozens of them, each one corresponding to locations where hikers had gone missing in the past 30 years, and 3 dots were circled in black. The girls. Grange had vanished, his bank accounts untouched. His ID never used again. It was as if he had become part of the woods themselves. Yet some still believed he was alive, watching, especially when a postcard arrived at the local ranger station weeks later. No return address, no message, just a photo of the forest after the fire, burnt, blackened, and in the bottom corner a handwritten note. They were never yours to find. It was postmarked from Tennessee. The silence had returned, but it felt more menacing now. As if the forest wasn't done with its secrets, not yet. With the postcard now in evidence, investigators were left stunned, not only by its timing, but by the haunting suggestion that whoever had written it was still alive and watching. The handwriting was analyzed, but with no confirmed samples from Everett Grange, there was no definitive match. Still, the tone echoed the strange detachment seen in the journal entries, that sense of ownership over the woods and disdain for those who dared to enter. Public interest in the case exploded. The families were overwhelmed with messages, theories, even tips. Most led nowhere, cranks and opportunists trying to inject themselves into a national mystery. But one tip stood out. A woman named Marlene Hutchinson came forward. In 2008, a year after the girls vanished, she and her husband had been camping in a remote area of the Smokies when they heard what she called a girl screaming 3 separate times. Her husband dismissed it as animal sounds, and they left the next morning. But she'd never forgotten. At the time, she hadn't reported it. Now, she was certain it had been human. Investigators cross-referenced her location with the map found under the cabin floorboard. Her campsite was directly adjacent to one of the red dots. That changed everything. It meant some of those dots weren't just theory. They were markers, real places tied to real people. The FBI launched a full-scale excavation of 5 key locations marked in red, areas previously ignored due to terrain difficulty or lack of clues. Over the following weeks, agents unearthed bone fragments, tattered fabric, rusted belongings buried beneath layers of moss and soil. In one location, a single charm bracelet was found, engraved with the name Tara. It was enough for DNA testing. The results, when they arrived, confirmed what the families feared. The bracelet had been worn by Tara Simmons, and the tiny bone fragment beside it matched her genetic profile. There was no more doubt. At least one of the girls had died in those woods. The grief returned like a wave, but so did resolve. The families held a joint vigil at the trailhead, candles lit, photos of the girls pinned to trees. They made public pleas for anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. And then, unexpectedly, someone did. A former hunter named Wallace Griggs, now in his 70s, called in. He claimed that years ago he had encountered a strange man deep in the forest, disheveled, quiet, always alone, watching him from a distance. The man had once offered him jerky without saying a word. Wallace declined and left the area, but the memory stayed. He described the man as having piercing blue eyes and a scar across his cheek. When asked to look at an old ranger photo of Everett Grange, Wallace didn't hesitate. "That's him. That's the one who watched me." Suddenly, the theory of Grange being dead began to crack. Could he still be out there, living off-grid, slipping between trees like a shadow? Surveillance in the park was increased. New thermal imaging drones were deployed. For weeks, they flew silently over the thick canopy, mapping heat signatures and unusual movement patterns. And then, at the edge of a glade scorched by the forest fire, they caught something. A single figure. Moving slowly, hunched, covered in what looked like camouflage netting. When rangers approached the area the next day, they found a burned-out tent, still warm. Inside, a notebook, handwritten with pages full of cryptic thoughts. The fire tried to take me, but they are still mine. And at the end, one final sentence underlined twice, I buried the rest where no one listens. A new map was sketched on the last page, and in the center of it, a symbol. A spiral carved into the paper, identical to one carved into a tree near where the girls had disappeared nearly 2 decades earlier. The spiral symbol was unlike anything investigators had seen before in any other missing persons case, unique and intentional. It was carved deeply into the tree bark, likely with a hunting knife, its lines deliberate, swirling inward like a maze with no escape. When compared to the drawing in the burned notebook, the match was undeniable. This was a signature, a mark, and someone had etched it into the land like a brand. Using the crude map from the notebook, a new search operation began, focused now on the northern ridge of the park, beyond what was thought to be accessible terrain. It was a brutal stretch of land, steep, rocky, with sudden drop-offs and thick clusters of pine that swallowed sound and light. A place no casual hiker would ever attempt. But it was here, 2 miles beyond the last spiral carving, that searchers made a horrifying discovery. Hidden beneath a shallow overhang in the ridge wall, a small opening led to what appeared to be a man-made crawl space. It was no wider than a kitchen cabinet, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, the smell of old decay hit like a wave. Using headlamps, rangers and FBI agents pushed deeper, eventually emerging into a hidden chamber. The walls were covered in moss and soot. In the corner, a mound of items, dolls, broken glasses, rusted tools, pieces of jewelry, sat stacked like trophies. At the center of the chamber was a pit, crudely dug and filled with earth that looked recently disturbed. They didn't touch it immediately. Photos were taken, forensics brought in. Days passed as they carefully excavated the site. One by one, they unearthed skeletal remains. Not just one girl, not just 3, but 7. 7 young female victims buried beneath the Smoky Mountains. DNA testing would later identify 3 of them as Tara, Melissa, and Janelle, the missing teens from 2007. The others remained unnamed. No records. No missing persons reports matching their descriptions. It was as if they had vanished from the earth unnoticed. But the deeper mystery was this. The final set of bones had signs of trauma, breaks that had healed, as if the person had survived long before dying. One set even showed evidence of a leg amputation, likely done without anesthesia. These weren't just murders. These were prolonged, orchestrated, ritualistic. As the FBI pieced together the evidence, one agent quietly said what everyone feared. This wasn't a man hiding from the world. This was someone hunting in plain sight. But there was one final twist. Among the items recovered from the chamber was an old camcorder, battered, corroded, but still intact. It took weeks to extract the footage. What they saw chilled even the most seasoned investigators. Grainy images of the woods, someone, presumably Grange, walking silently among trees, breathing heavily, whispering phrases to the camera like, "They follow the light, and I keep them safe from the world." Then a frame frozen in time. A girl, bound and blindfolded, sitting in the corner of the chamber. The timestamp read June 2008, more than a year after the girls disappeared. That meant at least one had lived for months. The footage ended abruptly, with the lens being covered by a hand. The camcorder was marked with initials scratched into the side, E.G. The hunt for Everett Grange, once considered a closed chapter, was now fully reopened. The man believed to be dead for over a decade was now being treated as an active fugitive, possibly still alive, possibly still watching. And if he was out there, how many more places like that hidden chamber existed? How many more spirals carved into trees had gone unnoticed? News of the chamber and the recovered camcorder spread like wildfire, igniting national media attention. Headlines called it the Smoky Mountain Crypt, and networks swarmed the park entrances with cameras and satellite trucks. But for the families, this was no spectacle. It was a return to grief, intensified by the new horror of what their daughters may have endured. Vigils were held, crosses placed near the ridge, and for the first time in 18 years, answers had names. Yet no one could say how long those girls suffered or why. The FBI formed a dedicated task force. Every ranger station, trail map, and old report was re-examined, but one question now loomed over all. If Everett Grange was truly alive, where had he gone? Or worse, who had been helping him all these years? The possibility of accomplices began to terrify investigators. A man like Grange, living off-grid, building chambers, capturing victims and evading detection for nearly 2 decades, couldn't have done it all alone. A theory emerged. What if Grange had created a network? Not online, but analog, letters, secret drop points, symbols carved into trees like breadcrumbs. The spiral. What if it wasn't just his signature, but a signal? An old ranger came forward, claiming that in 2002 he'd encountered a man who matched Grange's description deep in the woods. At the time, the man had claimed to be a botanist studying fungi. He had no identification and left no name. The report, filed at the time, had been ignored. No missing persons, no crime. But now it became a crucial piece. That sighting occurred nearly 100 miles from the discovery site, suggesting a range far wider than imagined. More symbols began to appear. Hikers reported spirals etched into bark miles from the original location. And soon, a hiker in South Carolina discovered a similar tree carving near a waterfall, a remote area with no cell signal and limited access. The ranger who responded found another eerie sign, a rusted canteen with initials EG etched into the lid. Suddenly the Smoky Mountains no longer seemed like the only hunting ground. Across Appalachia, in Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina, whispers grew. Campsites abandoned overnight, missing pet posters near trailheads. A woman in Alabama claimed she'd seen a ghostly man with hollow eyes watching her from the woods. At first, investigators dismissed it. But then she showed them something chilling, a small stone, hand-carved into a spiral, left on her porch the next day. Forensic analysis matched it to limestone native to the ridge near the original site. He was still out there. That was now certain. And worse, he had evolved. Technology didn't track him. He left no online footprint, no credit card use, no car registrations. It was as if he existed purely in the cracks of the world, in the shadows of parks, forests, and forgotten roads. To the task force, it was becoming increasingly clear. They weren't just hunting a killer, they were chasing a myth. And for the grieving families, the line between closure and nightmare was beginning to blur. Janelle's mother, Linda, spoke at a press conference with tears in her eyes. "We waited 18 years to bury our daughter, but now I lie awake at night wondering how long she was still alive and how many more girls are waiting." Her words echoed across the country, turning the case into a national obsession. Podcasts, documentaries, Reddit threads, everyone had a theory, everyone wanted answers. But the man who held them had vanished once again, like smoke in the mountains. Only the spiral remained. The FBI's next move was drastic. They issued an official fugitive profile for Everett Grange, even though no photograph of him as an adult existed. A digital age progression sketch was created and circulated to every law enforcement agency east of the Mississippi. Billboards went up on highways near major national parks. "Have you seen this man?" they asked, beneath a haunting rendition of the boy who vanished at 14 and may have returned as a ghost of the woods. Meanwhile, the camcorder recovered from the underground chamber remained in forensic analysis. The device had been badly corroded, its outer casing cracked from time and moisture. But technicians at Quantico worked tirelessly, using specialized imaging recovery techniques. What they found was fragmentary, clips, flashes, no audio, but it was enough to send a chill through the entire investigation unit. In one recovered frame, lit by a single lantern, were clearly the faces of the three missing girls, alive, frightened, surrounded by stone. In another clip, a shadow passed behind them, too fast to make out, but unmistakably male. The video quality was degraded, but the timestamp revealed something devastating. The footage was dated June 2009. That meant at least one of the girls had survived for nearly a year after their disappearance. The revelation shattered the families once more. Had they been kept alive for months? Were they moved? Why hadn't search teams found them back then? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Grange had vanished without a trace. But the video also showed something else. Scratches on the wall behind the girls, marks, tallies, lines etched into stone, grouped in fives. One group had 124 marks, another had only 7. Were they counting days, victims, attempts to escape? The cryptographers at the Bureau began to treat the chamber like a crime scene from a different time. They built 3D models, recreated the light angles, even tried to simulate the acoustics to understand how sound might have traveled. One chilling theory emerged, that the chamber had been used more than once, perhaps for different victims, perhaps even before the girls, or after. That idea, there might be more, triggered the reopening of more than 24 cold cases in the region. From as far back as the late 90s, reports of solo hikers vanishing, lone women disappearing off trail, and unexplained campsites with no trace of campers were re-evaluated. One case stood out, a young woman named Ashley Denton, who disappeared while solo hiking in 2004. Her case was barely noticed at the time, but now her brother came forward with a stunning detail. Ashley had sent him a postcard days before she vanished, and on the back, beneath her signature, she had drawn a tiny spiral. No one had paid attention to it then. Now it was like a scream from the past. The spiral had become more than a symbol. It was a signature, a taunt, a pattern, a map. What had seemed like random disappearances over the years began to feel like chapters of the same long, dark book. But who was writing it? A man who'd never held a phone, never posted online, never used GPS. Someone who knew the woods better than most people know their homes, and who had for decades slipped through the cracks like mist. As the task force expanded its range and timeline, a troubling new question surfaced. If Everett Grange had stayed hidden this long, what made him surface now? Why leave behind evidence after nearly 2 decades of silence? Had he made a mistake, or was it intentional? A message? A warning? No one could answer. But one thing was certain, the Smoky Mountains were no longer just a park. They were a hunting ground, and the predator might still be watching. The days that followed brought unease to every corner of the Smokies. Park attendance dropped sharply. Locals, once proud of the land's serenity, now spoke in hushed tones, locking their doors even during daylight. Rumors spun faster than facts. Everett Grange was seen hitchhiking on Highway 129. A strange man had been spotted near abandoned ranger stations. A hiker claimed she found a pile of bones near Cade's Cove, though they turned out to be deer remains. The sheriff's office, overwhelmed and understaffed, set up a dedicated tip line. Calls poured in, many from cranks or conspiracy theorists. But one stood out. A former trail maintenance worker named Nolan Keyes reported something he had seen 2 years prior and had dismissed until now. He had been clearing debris from a narrow path deep in the Greenbrier section when he stumbled upon a string of charms tied to a tree branch. Small dolls, made of twigs and cloth, arranged in a spiral. He assumed it was art, or perhaps left by a child, but now he was certain it meant something more. Investigators returned to the site with Nolan as a guide. What they found made their blood run cold. Behind the tree, partially obscured by brush and a collapsed ridge, was the mouth of a narrow fissure in the rock. It was barely wide enough to squeeze into, but once inside, it opened into a vertical shaft. Descending carefully, they found a second underground chamber, darker, smaller, more crude. And inside, another artifact. A child's backpack, sun-bleached and half-rotted. Inside it was a music box, rusted shut, and a notebook, sealed in a plastic bag. The name scribbled on the first page was Ashley Denton, the hiker who had vanished in 2004. The notebook was mostly illegible, its ink smeared and faded, but a few pages had survived. And what they said cracked the case wide open. Ashley had written about a boy with hollow eyes who watched her from the trees, about a whistle that came at night, and about rooms beneath the roots. She mentioned being taken, waking up in the dark, and hearing another girl crying nearby. Another girl. That meant Ashley hadn't been alone. More than one victim, possibly even overlapping with the 2007 disappearance of a woman named Carla Finch, who had vanished near the same region. Patterns were forming. The notebook became evidence not just of captivity, but of a chilling timeline that stretched back even further than anyone had realized. Everett Grange, or whoever was behind this, had potentially been active for over 20 years. The park, it seemed, had been a stage for a long, calculated series of crimes. The public demanded answers. Press conferences were held, but officials had little to offer beyond theories. Behavioral analysts believed the suspect was a deep woods isolate, someone who viewed the forest not as a refuge, but as territory. They speculated he may have lived in the wilderness full-time, surviving off the grid, using old survivalist techniques and choosing his victims with terrifying precision. Meanwhile, families of other missing persons from the Smoky Mountains began contacting the task force. New files opened, old ones reopened. From a vanished father and son in 1996 to a missing couple on their honeymoon in 2001, the cold cases came flooding in. There was now a real possibility that the Smokies were hiding the traces of a serial predator whose timeline stretched beyond anything authorities had ever considered. But with every revelation, one question loomed larger. Why now? Why the sudden trail of clues after years of silence? Was the predator getting sloppy or sending a message? The team feared the answer might come not in another clue, but in another disappearance. The answer came sooner than anyone expected, and in the most horrifying way. On a misty Thursday morning in November, just 6 weeks after the discovery of Ashley Denton's notebook, a couple from Knoxville was hiking with their teenage daughter in a remote section near Big Creek. They were taking photos near an old, moss-covered bridge when the girl noticed something odd near the base of a tree, a pair of shoes, children's shoes. They were worn, dirty, and mismatched. When her father bent down to inspect them, he saw something else. Carved into the bark above the shoes was a name. Lila. The parents froze. That was one of the 3 girls who had vanished in 2007. The family rushed back to the trailhead and called 911. Within hours, the site was surrounded by investigators. Crime scene tape was strung between the trees like yellow spiderwebs. A grid search began immediately, and within the first day they made another discovery. Buried less than 2 feet underground, wrapped in an old canvas tarp, was a camcorder. It was water-damaged and caked in soil, but the team believed it might still hold data. It took forensic techs 3 days to carefully clean, dry, and extract the contents of the mini DV tape inside. What they found shook the entire task force to its core. The footage was grainy and dark, but some details were unmistakable. 3 girls, tied at the wrists, huddled in what appeared to be a crude underground chamber, lit only by a lantern. Their faces were gaunt, their hair matted. But the most chilling part wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. They didn't cry. They didn't scream. They just stared, wide-eyed, at the camera as if trained or broken. A male voice could be heard in the background, calm, measured. He was giving them instructions. Look straight ahead. Don't move. You know what happens if you disobey. Then a sound, a whistle. That same whistle Ashley had mentioned in her notebook. When investigators paused the tape and enhanced the image, they noticed something subtle but vital. On the wall behind the girls, someone had scratched tally marks into the stone, dozens of them, and beneath the marks, in what appeared to be charcoal, the word others. This was no isolated crime. This was a system, a process, a method that had likely been refined over years, maybe decades. They now had visual confirmation of the girls being alive post-disappearance. It reopened the timeline. It reshaped the case. And most disturbingly, it suggested that whoever had made the recording had done so deliberately, perhaps knowing it would be found. The footage wasn't just documentation. It was a message. And for the lead detective, Marla Jennings, it raised a terrifying possibility. The predator was still active, still watching, still playing his game. They sent the video to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico. The BAU believed the voice belonged to a white male, likely between 50 and 70, highly intelligent, socially isolated, and deeply methodical. He likely knew the park better than most rangers. He had likely been planning this for a long, long time. But what frightened the team the most was this. The footage didn't seem old. The lantern was modern. The duct tape brand visible on the girls' wrists wasn't sold until 2018. This wasn't archival footage. This was recent. And that meant one unthinkable thing. At least one of the girls, or another victim, might still be alive. The race to find whoever had taken the girls was no longer a cold case. It was an active, urgent investigation. With the newly surfaced video indicating recent activity and the chilling implication that someone might still be alive, the FBI and National Park Service launched the largest coordinated manhunt in the history of the Smoky Mountains. They assembled a multi-agency task force of over 200 personnel, including wilderness trackers, forensic psychologists, drone surveillance teams, and even K9 units trained to detect human scent underground. The search area was vast, but they had one critical clue: the background sounds in the video. Audio experts filtered the footage and isolated a low, rhythmic thump that repeated every 40 seconds. A geologist on the team recognized it immediately. It matched the sound of a vintage water turbine, still used in a remote ranger station from the 1950s. That narrowed the search zone to less than 10 square miles. Still dense, still dangerous. But now they had a target. They mapped every old structure, cave, mineshaft, and hidden depression in the terrain within that radius. Then, just 3 days into the new search, a park drone picked up something unusual: a patch of disturbed earth behind a thicket of fir trees, exactly 2.6 miles from the last known marker where the shoes had been found. The ground looked leveled, but not naturally. Investigators hiked in immediately, arriving just before nightfall. What they found changed everything. Hidden under camouflage netting and branches was a hatch door, heavy, rusted, with a padlock that had clearly been replaced recently. With weapons drawn, they broke the lock and descended. A spiral of concrete steps led into complete darkness. The air was damp and sour, the walls were lined with old insulation, and the deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. At the bottom, they found a steel-reinforced room, roughly 20 feet. There were 3 cots, a rusted sink, a shelf with canned goods, and in one corner, a small TV hooked up to a DVD player, the same model seen in the video. But the room was empty. No one was there. However, on the wall, written in chalk, were words that chilled the blood of everyone present. "You found this one, but you're still behind." Below it, a crude drawing. 3 stick figures and a 4th, smaller one circled twice. It was clear now. There was at least one more victim, possibly a child. And the predator knew they were closing in. Forensics teams swept the bunker. They recovered multiple fingerprints, all belonging to the same unidentified male. DNA samples were collected from food items, hair strands, and even dried skin under the sink drain. But the most disturbing discovery came from the trash bin, a crumpled receipt from a gas station in Cherokee, dated just 2 weeks earlier. The man had recently been out, in public, possibly watching them. Back at Quantico, the behavioral team updated their profile. They now believed the suspect wasn't just a recluse, he was a control obsessive, likely someone with military or survivalist training and someone who derived psychological pleasure from watching his victims suffer. His ability to evade detection for nearly 2 decades pointed to a staggering level of discipline. The presence of surveillance equipment in the bunker indicated he might be watching the investigators even now. The Smoky Mountains weren't just his hiding place, they were his kingdom, his maze, and the girls, the victims, were pawns in a larger, twisted game that no one had fully understood until now. The tension across the investigation team reached a breaking point. The discovery of the underground bunker, along with the taunting message, had transformed the case from a grim mystery into a psychological war. The man they were chasing wasn't hiding anymore. He was playing. And worse, he was watching. That night, surveillance was doubled across the park. Drones flew overhead. Thermal imaging swept the forest floor. Plainclothes officers visited nearby towns, showing the grainy stills from the video and the security footage from the gas station receipt. But no one recognized the man. Then just before dawn, a ranger stationed near Klingman's Dome radioed in. He had spotted movement. A lone figure crossing a clearing near the ridge, wearing a heavy coat despite the warm night air. The figure moved with a limp. Backup rushed in, but by the time they reached the site, the man had vanished into the brush, leaving only a torn strap from a military-style duffel bag. Forensics confirmed it matched the fibers found in the underground bunker. They were close, too close. That same morning, as the sun rose over the misty peaks of the Smokies, a hiker reported something unusual near the entrance of a closed trail, an old Polaroid photo pinned under a stone. The photo was faded but unmistakable. 3 teenage girls, smiling nervously, their hands resting on their knees. Behind them, trees, the kind of trees only found in one section of the park. The girls were sitting on a fallen log. The photo was dated October 2007, the year they disappeared. Investigators raced to compare the background with older forestry maps. The log was identified. It had been catalogued in 2004 by a tree disease research team. It had since rotted, but its location was still marked. The site was deep within a rarely traveled zone, known for rock slides and sinkholes. When search teams reached it, they uncovered something shocking buried nearby, a plastic storage container. Inside, they found relics, 3 sets of clothes, jewelry, a cracked mirror, and a half-burned diary. The diary belonged to Megan Fields, one of the missing girls. It had only a few pages remaining, some burned, others water-damaged. But the words that remained were enough to paralyze everyone who read them. He says, "We were chosen, that the forest is his world, and we're just guests. I miss my mum. I dream about her voice. Sometimes I hear it in the trees. I don't want to forget it." The final page was charred but still legible. He's bringing someone new, a little one. I don't know if I'll still be here. The pages confirmed what the investigators feared most. Not only had the girls survived for some time after the abduction, they had witnessed others being brought in. The little one circled in the drawing on the bunker wall suddenly made sense. There were more victims, maybe dozens, and one might still be alive. Pressure mounted. The FBI elevated the case to a national priority. Billboards went up, news stations ran features, tips poured in, but most were dead ends. Then came a call from a retired forestry worker. He remembered, years ago, encountering a man who lived in a remote hunting cabin far off the grid. The man was odd, quiet, with piercing eyes. He claimed to be a writer, but never shared his name. The location? Less than 5 miles from where the Polaroid had been found. A new target was set. Teams were dispatched immediately, but when they arrived, the cabin was burning. Flames clawed at the night sky as the cabin burned with unnatural intensity, roaring as if trying to destroy every last trace of the evil that had festered inside. Fire crews fought to contain it, but the structure collapsed before they could salvage anything significant. It was clearly intentional, an arson, calculated and precise. No accelerant containers were found nearby, but the heat pattern and the speed of combustion suggested professional knowledge. The theory spread quickly. The man, whoever he was, had returned and set the place ablaze to cover his tracks. But why now? Had he been watching the investigation grow too close? Had he panicked? Or was this all part of his plan? The next morning, as the smoldering ruins cooled, forensic teams combed through the debris. What they found stopped everyone cold. Hidden beneath the blackened floorboards, untouched by the flames due to a steel trapdoor, was a crawl space. Inside were remnants of a life lived in shadows. A camping cot, several notebooks filled with manic writings, hundreds of Polaroids, some blank, others faded. But a few were unmistakable. Faces, eyes wide, fear frozen in grainy silence. Not just the missing girls, others, children, teens, even adults. Dozens of them. Some matched unsolved cases from the region, others were complete unknowns. The monster they were dealing with wasn't just hiding. He had been operating for decades. One particular notebook stood out. It was newer. Its last entry was dated just 1 week before the forest fire. They found the map. It begins again. They'll follow the symbols, but they won't find me. Not yet. The forest still listens to me. Those final words chilled the investigators to the bone. It wasn't over. He was still out there. Worse, he believed the forest was his ally. An entity that protected him, that listened, that obeyed. It sounded like the ravings of a madman. But after 18 years, who could say what was impossible anymore? Meanwhile, Megan Field's half-burned diary was sent to a specialized lab in Quantico. They recovered several more lines with infrared scanning. One fragment stood out. He calls the trail the path of names. He says if we walk it, we'll see the truth. The phrase triggered a memory in a retired park ranger now in his 70s. He remembered an old hiking path, long closed due to rock instability, once nicknamed by locals as the Path of Names, because of the carved initials in the trees along the way, hundreds of them, going back generations. It had been officially erased from maps in the late 1980s. A search team was sent to the location. What they found stunned them. Dozens of initials had been carved over newer ones, some clearly done in the past 2 decades. Some were dated. Some included full names. Some matched the victims. They followed the trail for over a mile before reaching a fork. There, nailed to a dead tree, was a single item, a hiking boot, a woman's size, worn, split at the sole, with a red shoelace. It matched the one Chloe Hadley had been wearing the day she vanished. DNA tests later confirmed it. This was her boot. Hope reignited. Maybe one of the girls had escaped. Maybe one had survived longer than anyone imagined. But if she had, where was she now? And why leave this trail? Investigators couldn't shake the feeling they were still being led, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, into something bigger, something far more twisted than they had prepared for. The trail wasn't just about the past, it was pointing toward a horrifying present, and time was running out. The final stretch of the old trail led deep into a canyon carved by time and forgotten by men. Trees leaned over the path like watchful sentinels, and the silence felt thick, expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The search team, now reduced to a specialized unit trained in cold case recoveries and wilderness tracking, moved cautiously. Every step stirred old leaves, broken twigs, memories buried in dirt. A mile past the boot, they discovered what appeared to be a makeshift altar. Rocks carefully stacked in a circle, with a wooden totem at its center. Crudely carved initials were etched along its sides. D.E.K. David, Ethan, Chloe, their names deliberately placed. Around the base were scraps of clothing, ribbons, and more Polaroids, some damaged by moisture, others disturbingly clear. They showed not only the three teens, but what looked like recent images, captured from a distance, of search parties, fire investigators, even the ranger who'd remembered the path of names. The implication hit like a cold slap. Someone was still watching. Someone had been among them. The team swept the area and discovered a narrow tunnel entrance partially hidden by brush and roots. The air flowing from it was stale, heavy. Inside, they found what could only be described as a shrine, or perhaps a memorial. The walls of the earthen tunnel were lined with photographs, all victims, layered like wallpaper. Some bore notes scribbled in charcoal, others had dates, a few had no names at all. But in the back, protected by plastic sheeting, were three small items: a child's friendship bracelet, a journal page with the words, "He made us choose," and a faded photograph of the three girls, smiling. It was their last known picture, but this one had a fourth figure, barely visible in the background. A man, out of focus, just a silhouette. But he was there, and no one had noticed it before. Forensics couldn't identify him. His face was never clear. But the investigators were sure now. This wasn't just the work of a loner hiding in the woods. It was something older, darker, a legacy passed in secret, protected by the silence of nature and time. The Smoky Mountains had always held stories of disappearances, hikers who wandered off trails, campers who never returned, legends of ghost lights and watchers in the trees. But now, those stories felt more like warnings, whispers ignored. The case was officially closed 6 months later, with a statement that enough evidence had been recovered to determine probable cause in the deaths of the missing teens. But no arrests were made. No suspect was ever named. The files were sealed. Families were given partial closure, but no justice. And in the following year, at least 4 hikers went missing in the same region. One of them had a photograph in his phone gallery, taken days before his disappearance, of a strange wooden symbol carved into a tree with the letters D.E.K. underneath. The media speculated. Online forums erupted with theories. Documentaries were made, but no new leads emerged. The trail ended, again, and the forest returned to silence. Today, a small plaque stands near the original trailhead, dedicated to David, Ethan, and Chloe. Hikers leave flowers, some whisper prayers. Others never return, and every now and then, during dry summers when the fire risk is high, smoke is seen rising from the deeper valleys. But no fire is reported, no cause is found, just smoke and silence. Maybe the forest isn't finished telling its story. Maybe some truths were never meant to be fully unearthed, or maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, the watcher still waits.